Today we're talking about Crucible again, the upcoming game by Amazon that's somewhere in the third-person hero shooter slash melee slash MOBA genre, depending on how exactly when you look at it, and that has many similarities with Gigantic, and we are going to look at Drakahl specifically because he also has a lot of similarities with someone from Gigantic, and that is Margrave, the Margrave. There's some visual overlap between the two, but especially in terms of abilities, you can definitely see some similarities when we talk about them, which we're going to do in a second. And I would go as far as saying that Drakahl's abilities are actually more interesting. If you've played the Margrave before, you probably have an easy time transitioning, but Drakahl just offers a little bit more in terms of high-level plays, I think, because he has some more skill shot implementation and is a little bit less tanky, so you have to make a few more decisions in that regard. He also has a very unique mechanic with multiple abilities that I haven't seen on any other character in Crucible yet, so I think he's very cool overall. Today we're first going to have a look at his stats, then look at his abilities and the upgrades for those, and then at the end we're going to dive into his lore a little bit. Quick note before we dive in, if this is the first video on my channel that you stumble across, my name is ZiSotto and I will be making Crucible content on the regular, and I already have quite a few videos as well, so feel free to subscribe if you want to stay updated for that. Now let's look at his stats. The first thing we're going to look at here is the defense and the health. Both is around the mid-range, it's not the lowest but also not the highest, and that's kind of what we can tell in the in-game footage as well, because all the HP values we see here are around 1000 plus, so I guess he starts with 1000 health and then scales up a little bit from there, meaning he would be in the mid-range of characters, while some squishier ones have 600, but I've also seen some characters with 2000 plus health. His range is very low, which is unsurprising for a melee character. His mobility and his damage are also both around the medium level, which I find a little bit surprising, because he looks like a very damagey character and you would think that if he's a melee then he would have to put out some more damage, but the stat that is really high for him is control. There are multiple different types of crowd control abilities in his kit, so this is not entirely surprising, though I do think it's surprising that it's basically almost a maximum rating. There are some more effects in his upgrades that can maybe explain this, because that gives him more control overall. And speaking of upgrades, let's look at his abilities and upgrades. His first ability, so to speak, is just his basic attack, which is Chop, strike with Vibrant Axe. However, different from most other characters, he actually has multiple upgrades for this already on level 1. And they make for very different playstyles. The first one is Second Wind. Successful chop attacks reduce the cooldown of your rush by 1 second. Rush, we'll get to later, rush is his dash. So this will decrease the cooldown of your main mobility or dash quite drastically if you hit the enemies with your basic attacks multiple times. Alternatively, on the same level, there's another upgrade also for your chop, and that is Maiming Blow. Chop inflicts damage over time against targets with less than 50% health. Very interesting. We don't know how much damage over time this will be, so it's gonna be a very tough decision between either having more mobility or more direct damage. Normally we will now go through the other abilities first, but because of how Drakahl's abilities work, we have to swap the order around a little bit. So the next ability we're talking about is the right click. That is Sonic Pulse. Fires Sonic Pulse from Vibrant Axe. Relatively straightforward ability in its visuals, at least. It's just a more ranged attack on this character. This ability apparently has 3 seconds cooldown, so very spammable really. And that is important because of the upgrades this ability has, because you have to keep in mind that you can use it very often. The first one is on level 3, and that is Incoming. Sonic Pulse destroys enemy projectiles. This one is obviously one where you have to be relatively skilled and well timing this ability all the time so that you can prevent shots from hitting you. It also depends a little bit on which projectiles it will work for exactly, but overall it sounds like a very strong mechanic in the hands of a skilled player. On level 5 there's an additional upgrade which I think is even more interesting, and that is Sonic Shock. Sonic Pulse slows targets by 25% for 3 seconds. Now a 25% slow by itself is okay. I think it's beneficial, especially when you're a melee character and you have to close the distance, but it's not necessarily super crazy. What makes it crazy is that the ability has a 3 seconds cooldown, at least roughly, and the ability slows for 3 seconds. So effectively, if you keep spamming the ability on the same target and they don't juke it, you will have them slowed by 25% all the time, and that sounds massive to me if you're a melee character trying to stick to an enemy. That's probably also why it's a level 5 upgrade. And that brings us to his next ability, which, if we match it up with the gameplay footage, is his Q, and that is Enraged Roar. You become enraged. Choose between a life-stealing claw attack or a ranged grab attack. 11 seconds cooldown roughly. So this ability gives you a choice. And that is the unique part of his kit, and this is something we'll see with the next ability as well. You can either go for Enraged Claw. While enraged, Chop, so your left mouse click, becomes Enraged Claw, a claw attack that generates healing over time. So this is a self-heal at the same time. The alternative is Enraged Grab. While enraged, Sonic Pulse becomes Enraged Grab, a short-range attack that pulls one enemy towards you. So this is a typical hook or grappling skill, like for example Roadhog has or Pudge has, or whoever you look at, something we see in a lot of games. But in this case you have to make a decision. You can either go for your self-heal and damage, or you can go for the hook. You can't do both. This ability only has one upgrade on level 5, which affects either of those forms, I think, because it's called Abs of Plasteel, and the effect is Enraged, makes you go invulnerable for 1.5 seconds. I'm pretty sure that happens in either scenario, so you're just invulnerable as soon as you use the ability, and then you can still choose which version of it you will use. His other ability, his E, again has the same two options. This is Resonating X. Your X hums with power. Choose between a spinning damage over time area attack or a stunning area attack. Both seem to have a 12 seconds cooldown. The Resonating Spin is, while resonating, Chop becomes Resonating Spin, a spinning attack that bleeds all enemies. Bleed, I guess, implies that it's a damage over time. The alternative option is Resonating Quake. While resonating, Sonic Pulse becomes a Resonating Quake, a shockwave attack that stuns and damages nearby opponents. So both of these are more the AoE damaging tools. Which one is more beneficial in which situation is hard to say, it depends a lot on the damage. Obviously CC is very nice for your team, at the same time I guess AoE damage is also very useful, so it's gonna be interesting to find out when to use which one of these. Both ability options here actually don't have any upgrades at all. And then we have the mobility ability, Rush, which I already briefly mentioned. That's the shift, where you dash forward in the direction your camera is facing. It's a cooldown of 12 seconds, but again you can reduce this if you level the second wind upgrade so that your basic attacks will reduce the cooldown by 1 second. There is also a node for another dash, and that is Jink. Drakahl jets forward in the current direction, but this is not shown in the trailer any further than that. It just is listed on the wiki so far. You may have noticed that these were very few upgrades so far, and that is because Drakahl has a lot of upgrades that aren't specifically tied to one ability. The first one is Get 'em Got It, which is a level 1 upgrade. The description of this is that quick melee attacks cause vulnerability for 3 seconds. So it seems like there is another form of attack, a quick melee attack. I've already seen this on multiple characters, so I guess a classic melee button for ranged characters as well. And that causes this vulnerability effect, which we also already saw in some other characters. Assuming this is some sort of protection reduction or damage increase, we would be able to combine that with his slow, and then every 3 seconds you slow the enemy with your right click, and then quick melee them in order to make them vulnerable. And then for those 3 seconds, they would, well, be more vulnerable to attacks, which means you could just maim down on them at all times. Which sounds very, very scary when you combine both. However, you would lose any benefits to your normal basic attacks, so maybe this is not necessarily the easiest one to use for beginner players. The level 2 upgrade is Tough It Out. 25% of incoming normal damage to you becomes damage over time. This essentially means that you have more ways of self-healing in between, which can be neat sometimes, or maybe dish out some more damage before you die. On level 3, there's the upgrade Okay, Now I'm Mad. Damage multiplier plus 15% when below 50% health. How useful 15% is exactly depends a lot on the exact circumstances and how that's calculated, but usually a 15% multiplier would be quite a solid factor. Either way, this is definitely some level of risk taker spec. The next one, also a level 3 upgrade that you could choose, it has a very different playstyle focus, and that is Blood Tracker. You attack targets with damage over time within 80 meters. How far 80 meters is in this game we yet have to find out, but obviously this synergizes with his maiming blow upgrade that inflicts damage over time to enemies automatically, and maybe also with his other ability that potentially has that bleed effect which might be damage over time too. And last but not least, there is a level 4 upgrade called Push Through the Pain. Damage does not interrupt medkit use. This is interesting because if you have the level 2 upgrade, which you will automatically get, then you have some damage that is damage over time to you, and that is something you can heal against with a medkit, and if damage doesn't interrupt that, then it means that effectively you can survive situations where you'd otherwise be dead because you can just use a medkit while the dot slowly ticks on you, and that allows you to survive. So generally speaking, despite being a relatively straightforward melee character, Drakahl has a lot of depth in his abilities and especially his upgrades that allow for very different playstyles, and even as an enemy, you kind of want to know which one you're in for because you might be hit by surprising amounts of damage in one way or another. Before we jump into the lore, a quick reminder that if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, feel free to click sub button and the bell if you want to be updated for future closer looks for Crucible characters or Crucible content in general. And now let's have a look at his description. Drakahl is the nastiest example of a nasty warlike race. His combination of brute force and psychotic ferocity make him one of the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy. Background: the Craig are known throughout the Orion Arm for their exceptional brutality. That might contextualize the scale of attitude problem implicit in the fact that Drakahl is so bloodthirsty that his own war clan sent him into exile. Happily for Drakahl, the galaxy is full of opportunities for cruel beings who are willing to do anything, so long as it's violent, for the right price. Drakahl has thoroughly enjoyed a long career of bringing his unique approach to problem solving to all manners of situations, from deterring invasive species to resolving diplomatic tensions. Most recently, he has been contracted to acquire some essence samples for the War Mistress of Karta. It's a new situation, but the solution is the same as it always is: repeated and gleeful application of his sonic axe. Personal file: Drakahl is what I like to call a liability. He loves swinging that axe of his, and he doesn't always know when to stop. That's probably why his clan kicked him out. Drakahl loves violence, pure and simple. Essence is just an excuse for him to go down and cause mayhem. Drakahl always seems to be enjoying himself, never stops smiling. At least one of us is having a good time. By Lawrence Thibault, commander of the Crucible Orbital Station. And that is it for Drakahl. I honestly find him super interesting, and I think he might actually become my main character. I have to see how the others feel in game, but this one really hits the spot for me. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one soon. Duke Sloth, out.